You're listening to a production of SportsLink Digital Radio.
It is Thursday, which means the school week is coming to an end, but a new weekend of college football is just beginning. Welcome to week 2 of Behind the Lines, as we have got a great show today with Ryan Stojetz. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to a fun show.
Absolutely, and another week means another guest, and today we have the host of My Two Cents joining us today, Dane Massey. Dane, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, Dane, we really appreciate you coming on for episode 2. And guys, the weekend has arrived. We got a full new slate of games, new predictions, so much more to get into. So let's just jump right into it. The Ball State Cardinals coming off their second consecutive loss. This one to Western Michigan, a lot better affair than it was against Georgia Southern. Ryan?
It was better, but it wasn't much better. And particularly what's plagued the Cardinals the past 2 weeks, it's the slow starts. It was a rough first half for Ball State. They did get on the board first with a field goal, but Western Michigan was able to answer quickly and take a lead into the locker room. It was 28-10 at half. So when you dig yourself into that deep of a hole, it's just no matter how well you play in the second half, it's tough to bounce back from that. And the second half, each team scored 2 touchdowns in the second half, so it was an even game starting from the third quarter. Ball State's issue has been they got to bring it from the opening kickoff. They were outscored 7-3 in the first quarter, and then the second quarter was the most dominant quarter for the Western Michigan Broncos, where they outscored Ball State 21-7. Second half, there were some more bright spots, but simply if the Cardinals want to win these conference games, they got to be better out of the gate.
Yeah, Dane.
Where do I start? I think the game between Georgia Southern to Western Michigan, it's like going from an F to a D in my eyes. It really is. It was ugly from start to finish. Let's be honest. That Western Michigan game was ugly from start to finish.
There were some bright spots.
There were some, not many.
Not where Ball State wants to be.
From a fan standpoint, you look at the score. I mean, everybody's gonna look at that score and then be like, "Yeah, this game was ugly from top to bottom." There were a few bright spots, but I think that the ugly sides of it really outdo the bright sides of it, and that's really what this can summarize this game. I mean, it was 28-10 at halftime, and you just can't let that kind of score happen at halftime, especially if you're the Cardinals coming into this season with somewhat high expectations, and especially with Mike New having a little bit of fire under his belt after the Georgia Southern game. You can't really come back and lose a game like that. I mean, it's just not a good look for yourself. But, I mean, Cardinals fans were certainly not pleased with watching this one, and that's what we're going to transition to going into the Eastern Michigan game, is that they need a win. They need at least one win. Otherwise, it's going to be a tough road for the Cardinals going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the road, and I think we have to look at one player, especially that stood out from Western Michigan. That was Anthony Sambucci, who had 5 catches for 73 yards and 3 touchdowns. The reason why I bring this up is that, to me, he was an explosive player for Western Michigan out of the gates. Ball State had 3 big plays. They had that touchdown by Ahmad Edwards late in the fourth quarter. They had that unbelievable touchdown by Keon Magwood.
Yeah, that was an amazing.
That was crazy.
It was an incredible touchdown for the Cardinals. But yeah, you mentioned it was 28-10 at halftime. Ball State's offense really didn't get it going, and when they did, it was a couple explosive plays. Other than that, the offense was kind of shut down against Western.
And not only that, this is their second game in a row where they've gave up 40 points. Mm-hmm. So my question to not only right for this show is, what's the message to the defense? What is the message to the defensive side of the ball giving up 80 points in just 2 weeks? It's just insane.
Yeah, Treson Borget, who you said coming in the quarterback for Western Michigan, had an incredible day, 24 for 39, 3 touchdowns, 328 total yards. So he had a field day with the Ball State
he
secondary.
Did. And he was named a MAC West Offensive Player of the Week as a result of that. But just kind of going off of what Dane said, I listened to some of Mike New's press conference from earlier in the week, and talking about that Western Michigan game, he said a few things really plagued them in that game. First, too many penalties in the first half, and a lack of execution in the first half. And this is something that I think could maybe go towards the defense. He talked about players just playing with confidence, focusing on doing their job, following their assignments, and not trying to do too much. And at the end of the day, something he said is that they just dug too big of a hole in the first half. So defensively giving up 28 points in the first half, it can't happen. But something that we got to talk about from this past game before we completely turn the page to Eastern Michigan coming up on Saturday. Lane Hatcher got the start, a bit of a surprise, the veteran quarterback, and he looked good. 26 for 37, 316 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. So a really nice game for the veteran. It's kind of been a bit of a revolving door for the Ball State quarterback job over these first 5 weeks. But what do we think of the decision to start Hatcher, and will he be the guy moving forward?
I think it was interesting because Hatcher really showed that he can be the starting quarterback this year for the Cardinals, but I don't like the circle that they're going with it. I just really don't. It just kind of, there's too many questions. You guys get what I'm kind of saying here? There's too many questions with who's going to be the guy to lead this team forward. And maybe they have found that in Lane Hatcher because he was brought in to kind of be the guy, and he struggled a little bit in his first couple of games with the Cardinals. But now with this, he throws a 3-touchdown game, is over 300 yards, had a pretty good day. Maybe he can be the guy for the Cardinals going forward. And it's kind of the picture is starting to become clear as who's going to be, what the depth chart in that quarterback position is going to look like. Maybe it's Hatcher, Samanza, and then Kyle Kelly. Mm-hmm. Maybe Samanza overthrows Hatcher. But now, as these weeks start to flow by, we get to get a clear picture of what this Cardinal offense and the leadership in the locker room is going to look like.
I will say something. You mentioned just the 10 points at halftime, but Lane Hatcher had a lot of confidence throwing the ball. He looked good. He was able to find those open receivers and make good reads and allow Ball State to move down the field. Again, they did score 24 points. A lot of those were just 3 big explosive plays, but you got to give Lane Hatcher a lot of credit for the way he played on the road at Western Michigan, which was a very hostile environment, especially for the MAC Conference.
Yeah, and something that I think about when I think about Lane Hatcher is veteran leadership. This guy, he has played a lot of college football at multiple schools, dealt with a lot of adversity in a lot of different ways in his career, and he's someone that some of these younger players can really look up to. And I'm not saying the other quarterbacks can't provide leadership and that they don't have experience, because they do. And even Samanza as a freshman, I think that he's the one that's clearly very talented, and I think he's quickly gained a lot of respect in that locker room for how he stepped up as a freshman. But at the end of the day, this team is 1-4. Their one win is against an FCS opponent. They need stability and they need consistency. You owe it to your team to have consistency under center. You can't just keep having this revolving door. Who's it going to be? I think Hatcher's the safest option, and I think when in doubt, just give it to your veteran. I think Samanza showed flashes, but maybe he isn't a finished product yet, while Hatcher is much more experienced. I think he's more accurate right now. I think he takes care of the football, and I think what you kind of alluded to is that Hatcher really can make any throw you need him to make. He can stretch the field, get that deep ball involved more often, and get the ball in the hands of his playmakers, which he did do a good job of. Now, it still wasn't enough, obviously, but, you really can't fault Hatcher for it too much when he didn't turn the ball over, throwing no picks and 3 touchdowns. It's at the end of the day, the defense can't give up 40-plus points and expect to win too many games.
Yeah, I love the way that you placed it. He's a very experienced quarterback, and he will make the right throws. But I will say, Caden Samanza did have a lot of flash against Kentucky, and that allowed him to be able to get those starting roles against Georgia Southern, against Indiana State, even against Georgia. So I did like the way Lane Hatcher played against Western Michigan, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do for Eastern Michigan. And one thing I did want to bring this up is we talked about last week, Ryan, was how Ball State needed to convert on those third downs. They were just 3 for 12 against Western Michigan on third down. Struggled once again, so they're definitely going to need to pick that one up, especially against a pretty solid Eastern Michigan team. Now, obviously, we mentioned it a lot of times. Ball State is going to Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan coming off a loss 26-23 against Central. Dane, let's start with you.
And it's a very interesting matchup. You mentioned that Central Michigan game. With rivalry games, that was a rivalry game of its own. Central versus Eastern, Michigan State rivalry. With these kind of rivalries, you never know what you're going to expect. And obviously, Central getting the best of Eastern, they're gonna be ticked. They're gonna come into this game fired up. They're coming off a loss to a key rival. And Ball State also needing a win. They desperately need a win. And it's going to be a matchup of 2 desperate teams looking to come back for a win. It's going to be an interesting one to watch.
It really is. And, just looking at the fact that both teams are looking for their first MAC win of the year. Because, both of them already have a conference loss. But the mentality for both these teams has to be everything's still in front of you. For Ball State, you lost to Western Michigan, but Western Michigan already has a conference loss themselves because they lost to Toledo earlier in the season. So you win this game, then you got Toledo the week after, which will be a really big game if Ball State seriously wants to compete for a MAC title. So the message for really both teams, but especially for the Cardinals coming off of a much more lopsided loss than Eastern Michigan, because that was a 3-point game between Eastern and Central. The message for Ball State really just has to be, hey, it hasn't been what we wanted it to be. We didn't envision this type of start. But something that Mike New mentioned in his presser this week that really stuck with me is that he said that every year, there's a success story where maybe it didn't start the way you would like it to. That not every team that wins it when it's all said and done was, really good from the start and just dominant, that they had to face some adversity and they had to do some soul searching. And there were times where it really wasn't working, but they just trusted the process and stuck to it. So Mike knew saying that, and he gave some examples of teams that have done it in the presser. They're escaping me right now, but he mentioned that somebody every year has a success story, that maybe it didn't start the way you would like it to, maybe you didn't see it coming from the beginning, and I think that's a great message for him to say, because we're 1-4, but everything's still in front of us. We can still make a bowl game. We've played one conference game. There's a lot of football left to be played. That's something else that he said in that presser. So it hasn't been pretty, but there's still so much in front of this football season.
It sounds like Mike New is recognizing the fact that Ball State desperately needs this win. I mean, they need it because going Toledo, let's be honest, Toledo is looking really, really good. They really are really good.
They're a powerhouse in the MAC.
They are a powerhouse in the MAC right now. I mean, with DeQuan Finn, who's looked like probably the best quarterback in the MAC right now, they're going to have a lot on their hands against that Toledo game. So going in to this game against Eastern Michigan and they get a win, they're going to have a lot of momentum going into that Toledo game. But if they don't, it's going to be a rough game for the Cardinals, especially with the fact that the morale is going to be low going into that one. So Ball State, it sounds like Ball State and Mike New are sounding like they need to get this win.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it must win, but I love what you said is that it's not how you start, and that's what Coach New is really emphasizing here. It's not how you start, it's how you're going to finish. And yes, Ball State is 1-4, one of the lower teams in the MAC conference. I think one of the rankings came out where they weren't even a top 10 team in the MAC. But you look at this team, you look at their schedule, they still have to play, obviously, they still play Toledo, they still have NIU, they still have a lot of games left to improve. This is an offense that if they can get it rolling and that defense finds some success, that they could reel off 5-6 wins and get themselves back, not only in a chance for in a bowl game, but who's to say a chance at the MAC championship? I know it's early.
It's all in front of them.
They've played one game, and again, their offense played a lot better than, of course, Georgia Southern. They had some miscues here and there. They got to get that defense. That's my biggest thing with that. And speaking of the defense, is that, or moving back to the quarterback, is Austin Smith in Central Michigan, who has a really solid defense. Austin Smith, the quarterback for Eastern Michigan, had a lot of success, 20 for 26, 186 yards, and a touchdown. This is an Eastern Michigan team who averages about 136 yards through the air. So Smith was certainly finding a lot of success. And the reason why I brought up Anthony Sambucci is Eastern Michigan's got a kid who's very similar. He's very elusive. He's very explosive out of the secondary, and that's Tanner New. No, not Tanner Koziel, our tight end, of course. Tanner New, who has 22 catches, 187 total yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's having a really solid year for the Eagles. So be aware on the lookout if you're the Cardinals for him.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a big test to this Ball State defense. They're going to have to step up and they're going to have to play more aggressively, as I would say. And it's going to be a big test. Eastern Michigan's defense, not that good. They give up about 22.4 points per game. So it's going to be an interesting game. Could this be the game where Ball State finally puts the pieces together and has a complete game where both sides of the ball are clicking? We saw it last game against Western where the offense was clicking. Can we get the defense to start clicking a little bit and put this game together?
Yeah, and when I look at that defense, I see and I know we'll get into matchups and keys to the game a bit later in the show, but a bit of a sneak peek here. Eastern Michigan has the worst run defense in the MAC. They allow an average of 221 rush yards per game. So Marquez Cooper potentially poised for a big day. Last week, 15 carries for 82 yards, 4 catches for 54 yards, which I love. I talked about last week how I wanted to see him be used in more versatile ways, more different ways, using him as a receiver more, kind of getting him maybe even lined up in the slot at sometimes. We're starting to see a little bit of that, and I think that's something that's very encouraging. So he could potentially be poised for a big day because that Eastern Michigan run defense has been, less than spectacular, to put it nicely, in the early portions of this season. Now, obviously it's a week-to-week league. You never know. But I think that if you look at Ball State, something that even in some of their bad losses they've been pretty good at is time of possession. So if they could have 12-play drives where they're just running the football up the middle, taking time off the clock, keeping the ball out of Eastern Michigan's hands, I think that could bode really well for the Cardinals and be a potential path to victory.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you mentioned 200-plus rushing yards that Eastern Michigan's allowing. A huge factor, I think, in this one is going to be how they utilize Kyle Kelly, whether they use him as a QB sneak or if they use him out, like they used him a couple times to throw the ball to, and as a receiver. And he made sure he caught the ball and then was able to get a couple yards after. So he's definitely going to be that player for the Cardinals to look out for. And you mentioned the leadership. I think Kelly's got a leadership just as much as Hatcher, honestly.
Really, and it's interesting because Brady Hunt's probably not going to be playing this game. He's been dealing with an injury, and he's probably not going to be playing. So what if we plug Kyle Kelly in that role that Brady Hunt was supposed to be? So you had Kyle Kelly and Tanner Cozy on opposite sides of the ball. I mean, Kyle Kelly looks pretty good as a receiver. He's a speedy receiver. Has shown to be able to catch the ball and get some good yards. So why not have two threats? Two tight ends, put in another tight end threat on with an opposite with Tanner Cozio. I think it could be a brilliant move for the Cardinals, and it probably could work out.
Yeah, my thing with Kyle Kelly, he is very talented. I just think he has to be utilized in the right way. I think where he could come in is some of those third down plays where Marquez Cooper, I think he's very talented, but he's not really a run between the trenches 30 times a game type of back in my opinion. So on 3rd and 2, I feel like sometimes they try to run it with Cooper and he gets stuffed at the line, and it's just, he's not built to go through those types of runs all the time. A lot of running backs aren't. I think he's more of a shifty guy, run to the outside, get him on screens, HB tosses, pitches, whatever. But the point is, I think on 3rd down, a great play call could be, line up Kelly in the shotgun, have Cooper or somebody come in motion, fake jet sweep, and then have Kelly hopefully sell the fake really good and then run it up the middle. So I don't know if any of the Ball State coaching staff is listening, maybe make a late addition to the playbook for this week. But really, I just think offensive creativity has to be the thing. I think you have to, and they got guys hurt. Brady Hunt is one of, if not the best tight ends in the conference. Ty Robinson has been out since that Kentucky game. He had a really strong performance in week 1, so missing him is tough. So other guys have stepped up, and we'll get into that later. But I just think that, Kyle Kelly, he's too good to not be on the field, but I think there's a time and a place for his skills to be best utilized.
Yeah.
And I think that they could really use him on those outside runs. They could run options with Marquez Cooper. They could fake one way, and then, or they could just run with him. And then when Kyle Kelly gets some pressure, just throw it to Marquez Cooper, and he goes off. I think that you utilize. You mentioned it, Ryan. You got to utilize your player to your strengths, and I think Ball State has not super really done that with Kyle Kelly yet. I mean, they're still kind of figuring out what kind of player he wants to be. But I think it's just if they can really use Kyle Kelly like in those kind of plays, those 3rd and short plays where they can sense a run. They could use Kyle Kelly in the run game, and they could probably use him as a fake passing game.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going to get, but they got to use Kyle Kelly in the right way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Before we jump into the next kind of around the MAC, the one thing I wanted to look at is those head-to-head matchups. And Ball State, a little bit more than Western Michigan, of course. They played their 50th game last week between Ball State and Western Michigan. Ball State actually has a 37-25 record against Eastern Michigan. But here's something interesting. 20-12 on the road against Eastern and 17-13-1 at home. Ryan, what do you make of that?
Honestly, I think it's, this is something that's year to year. I don't think, it's something that you really read too much into. I think the game last year was a pretty low scoring game.
Yeah, 20-16 was the final,
20-16. Eastern Michigan spoiled homecoming here in Muncie, Indiana. So I mean, it's interesting to look at trends like that. It's interesting, especially with conference opponents, to look at history. These are schools that have been playing for a while. But at the end of the day, it's a new year. It's a new season. So, that's a fun, interesting stat there. You wouldn't really guess that they'd be better on the road than at home. But at the end of the day, it's a new season. I mean, I'm focused on the matchups in this one, on the strength for Ball State versus the strength for Eastern Michigan. So it's very interesting to hear that. I just don't know how much it plays into this game.
It's going to be interesting because this is the 65th time that Ball State and Eastern Michigan are going up against each other. And you mentioned 20-12 on the road, Ball State is favored. And they're going back home to play Eastern Michigan. So it's going to be a fun one. And again, as I mentioned before, both teams are coming into this game hungry for a win. So it's going to be a fun one to watch. But Ball State could possibly have an edge with that record at 20-12 on the road. But we'll see. It's a long road ahead, and it's going to be a fun one to watch.
So we mentioned Western Michigan a lot, obviously, because that's who Ball State played them. Well, now jumping into the rest of the MAC conference, Western Michigan, probably the biggest test of their season, really, and probably the MAC of this week is Western Michigan. Guys, let's jump into the predictions for the MAC conference. Western Michigan at Mississippi State. Ryan, let's start with you.
Yeah, I got to say it because last week we had Bowling Green, Georgia Tech on the slate, and no one wanted to touch Bowling Green. And what did Bowling Green do? They went on the road and beat the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets 38-27, making it the 4th time this year that a MAC team has beaten a Power 5 team. We had Ohio beat Iowa State, NIU beat Boston College, Miami of Ohio beat Cincinnati, and Bowling Green beat Georgia Tech. So I just want to put that out there. But with that being said, I look at Mississippi State. they're a 2-3 team. They're 0-3 in the SEC, but they still are in the SEC.
Absolutely.
Which maybe this year they're not the most top heavy conference in terms of talent, but widespread. I think they still have the most talented rosters in college football. Mississippi State's coming off of a bad loss to Alabama last week, so they're going to be looking for a bit of a get-right game before they resume conference play. And Western Michigan, as we know all too well, is coming off of a strong performance versus our Ball State Cardinals. So I think this is one where Western Michigan, if their offense can keep it up and, have that same explosiveness that they had against Ball State, even against Toledo before that, they had some good offensive plays, scored, I think, 31 points. But at the end of the day, the SEC is just a different breed. So I think Western Michigan will play hard, give them a fight for the first half, but I think Mississippi State will pull away. Give me Mississippi State winning 41-21.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't really need to give any analysis here. I just know that Mississippi State is going to absolutely blow Western Michigan out of the water. Because, let's be honest, Mississippi State is not Georgia Tech, and they're not Iowa State. They are so much better than those teams, and it's not even close. But Mississippi State, by a mile, I think they probably win by 40-plus points.
I could look at it two ways. I could see what Western Michigan did against Ball State, but then I could see they're going into a Power 5 SEC, and I don't care if you're 0-3 in the SEC. You are in the SEC is what you brought up earlier. I have this one being actually pretty close. I have this being a 17-20 game at halftime.
Okay.
And then I have Mississippi State exploding, and they win this one 44-27. I think Mississippi State has a great third quarter, able to get a lot of rhythm and run away with it. But I think Western keeps it close.
Yeah, when you said 2017 there, I was like, whoa, that's really close.
Yeah.
At halftime. So, that's kind of how a lot of it goes. I mean, even, when, like, you compare it to when we played Kentucky week 1, it kind of has a similar vibe to that game where, obviously now in hindsight, Kentucky looks really good. They're 5-0 and they just beat Florida. But you're going on the road to play an SEC team. Maybe it's not a top-tier SEC team like a Georgia or Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU, but it's still a pretty darn good football team. And I think that's what you see for Western Michigan. So, what my mentality is, and this was my mentality as a Ball State fan going into the Kentucky game, I don't care what the spread is or what conference anyone's in. You're in it till you're not, and that just has to be the mentality when you're a MAC team going to take on a Power 5 team. So Western Michigan, a win against Mississippi State would really put them on the map. But at the end of the day, I think they should just embrace the opportunity, even if things aren't going well. Just use it as an opportunity to get better and prepare yourself for the rest of the conference season. And at the end of the day, no matter how ugly the score is, it really doesn't make a situation where Western Michigan has that much to lose.
Yeah, I really got to bring up this point is that Western Michigan, although kind of ran away with it in the first half, is that Mississippi State is also coming off that loss to Alabama, so they're going to want to be hungry to get that win, and they don't care if it's a MAC team at SEC. They're going to be hungry, and that's why I think they're going to really take over in that second half. All right, let's move on to game number 2. Another non-MAC conference game. Toledo going into UMass. Dave, let's start with you.
Where do I start with this game besides Toledo probably going to put up another 70 points like they did against Texas Southern? UMass is not super great. I mean, in terms of it's really how they've been over the last couple of years. I mean, UMass is just a team where I think anybody can really run them over because they're that bad. But I think that Toledo, you got to look at Taquan Finn, and Toledo's offense is just absolutely legit. They're the number one team, they're the number one in the MAC in every offensive team category. And this is going to be another game where the score is not going to be close. Toledo, I think, will probably win they'll probably win by 40 points.
I don't know about 70, but Toledo does have the best offense in the MAC right now, averaging 40.8 points per game. They've got playmakers on their offense. They've got Junior Vandeross III and Jerjon Newton, who are second and third in receiving yards in the MAC, respectively. Penny Boone is also the second leading rusher in the MAC as their running back. And you've mentioned him multiple times, Daquan Finn. He's one of the better QBs in the MAC, if not the best. He can make plays with his arms and his legs. UMass, winless on the year. They've actually played 2 MAC schools already, lost to both Eastern Michigan and Miami. I think Toledo is better than both of those schools. Give me the Rockets 40-27.
Okay. Dane, you talked about winning by 70. Was it the Miami Dolphins the one time they put 70 points that everyone just wants to bring up? Oh, they'll put up 70 points. That's still 70 points.
It was an overreaction, to say the least.
Understandable. I have Toledo, maybe keeping it close. I have them winning this game 38-20. I think Toledo's big in the fourth quarter, and UMass gets a touchdown here and there to cut it, to make it respectable, but I think Toledo rolls. Our third game is we have the first MAC game that we're talking about, other than, of course, Ball State at Eastern Michigan. Central Michigan at Buffalo. Guys, I feel like this could be an interesting one.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this game is really interesting because Buffalo is kind of having a little bit of a down year. They're not as good as we think that they always are. But it's not really because of their offense. Cole Snyder is an absolute beast. Over 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, and only 4 picks. Their defense, on the other hand, has been kind of on the downward slope. They haven't been as good as we're used to seeing them. But so I got to give it to Central. I think it's going to be close. I think 23-20 will be the final. I think Central will end up winning this one because Central is coming off a win against rival Eastern Michigan. Their morale is going to be high. They had a really impressive showing against the Eastern Michigan team, and I think that Buffalo's defense is just going to be too much for Buffalo. I really do.
I look at this game, and you mentioned it, Central coming off of the win against Eastern. Buffalo's coming off of their first conference win, actually their just first overall win as well against Akron. It was a low-scoring overtime win on the road, but it was a win nonetheless. But kind of to your point, Dan, I just trust Central Michigan a little bit more right now. I think they're a bit more of a complete team. I think that they'll be able to score some points, and I don't know if Buffalo will be able to match their offensive scoring ability. So give me the Chippewas 31-17.
Yeah, I kind of like Central Michigan's veteran presence that they have. They have a lot of upperclassmen who have really stepped up, especially this year for the Chippewas, and I have them winning this one in a bit of a closer affair. I have them winning this one 33-23 over Buffalo. The next game, guys, I got an interesting one, but I want to hear your picks first. Bowling Green at Miami. Now, these are two teams who are on kind of opposite spectrums on the MAC side, but Ryan, let's start with you.
I actually think it's hard to pick against either of these schools right now because I look at Bowling Green. They just had a really impressive performance on the road, beating Georgia Tech, who's in the ACC, 38-27 in a game that I think they were 3 touchdown underdogs in. So that was really a statement win. But then you look at Miami, they've won 4 in a row since their season opening loss to Miami, Florida. In there is a win on the road against now Power 5 Cincinnati. So I kind of went back and forth with this one. I do like Miami. I think they're Ohio's number 1 threat in the MAC East. So give me Miami winning it 24-14.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with Ryan on this one. I got Miami, and it's mostly because of their offense. Their offense is just one of the best in the MAC. It ranks second behind Toledo in most team offensive categories. How about Brett Gabbert, though? He's a legit threat in the MAC right now as a quarterback. Over 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, only 3 picks. And they're going to test this Bowling Green defense, who really showed their own against Georgia Tech. But I think that Miami gets it done, and they get a big win in front of their hometown fans.
I do think Miami does get the win, but I think it's a lot closer. I think Miami wins in a what I like to call a Maction shootout, a 45-38 Red Hawk win over Bowling Green. I think Bowling Green takes that momentum from Georgia Tech, what they did. And remember, it was 38-27 final. Bowling Green was up 18 headed to the fourth quarter. They were up 38-20 against Georgia Tech on the road. And again, I know it's not the Clemson, it's not Duke, it's not Notre Dame, but that's still an ACC team, and that's still on the road too. Is anytime you can win on the road is really incredible. But I do have Miami winning this one. I think Miami's offense is just too much, and I think Bowling Green's defense will kind of settle down and give up some big plays in the fourth quarter and lose this one 45-38. All right, just a couple more games to go. Kent State at Ohio. Ryan.
I'm not going to overanalyze this one. I think Ohio's fantastic this year. I think that they're easily the best team in the MAC. I'd pick them against some Big Ten teams, to be honest with you, with the way they're playing right now. And I'm going to throw in a bold prediction before I even make the score prediction. I think that Ohio, after this week, they will be receiving votes in the AP.
Wow.
And as you could probably guess, I think they're going to beat Kent State this week. And Kent State's playing some really tough opponents, and they're playing hard. They're just nowhere near where Ohio is as a program. So give me Ohio winning decisively 37-10, and you'll see some receiving vote. You'll see Ohio in the receiving votes category of the AP poll next week if my prediction comes true.
Okay.
There's only 2 words to describe Ohio in the MAC right now, and that is an elite team. It's the only 2 words that you can use. And Ohio, in terms of how they've been, they have Curtis Rourke under center, who last year, continuing to this year, has probably looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the MAC right now. That defense, oh my God, are they special. That defense is unbelievably good for Ohio. And I think Ohio wins this game by at least, I'm going to say 32-10.
My prediction very similar to your guys. I think the Bobcats defense is sensational. I think it's one of the best ones we've seen in the MAC in a long time, and that's why I have to look down the list. But when Ohio will play Toledo, when they will, because we know they will in some point.
Yeah, maybe in Detroit again.
Exactly right. Is that game is going to be incredible to watch. But for now, I think Ohio rolls over Kent State. I think they're up 34-0 after the first half.
Wow. And
then that's it. Ohio's done for the game. They put in their backups. I have Ohio winning this one 37-6 over Kent State. But yeah, Ohio's is probably one of the best. And as you said, now that I think about it, when you saw Akron versus Indiana a couple weeks ago, I think you're right. Ohio could beat some Big Ten teams, absolutely. Speaking of Akron, we have our final game in the MAC schedule, NIU at Akron. Both these teams kind of very similar. Ryan?
Yeah, 2 tough losses for the Zips in back-to-back weeks. You kind of alluded to it. They lost against Indiana in an overtime heartbreaker 2 weeks ago, 29-27. That went, I think, into 4 overtimes where they were doing 2-point conversions. And then last week they lost to Buffalo 13-10 in OT. And over to the NIU side, they really impressed me in the Toledo game. Even though that they lost, they gave the Rockets all they could handle. They were in it to just about the very end. I went back and forth with this one, but I was thinking about giving it to Akron, but seeing that their quarterback, DJ Irons, who's really a sensational player, fun to watch, out for a season with the torn ACL. So certainly wishing him a good recovery, but certainly a really disappointing injury because he was a very talented playmaker for Akron. With him out, I just don't feel comfortable picking the Zips in this one. Give me NIU 28-14.
Yeah, with Irons out, it definitely doesn't help, for sure. The Huskies have also won 6 of the last 7 matchups against Akron. And the Huskies have also been known to be in a lot of close games. All but one of their games have kind of been really, really close. So I think this game is going to be closer than what people think, right? I think it's going to be 20-17, but I think the Huskies get it done.
I think that NIU does get the win. I think it's a lot closer. I think it's 20-16. I feel like what NIU did at Toledo was very impressive. Holding it within 2 points, and really it was a back-and-forth game throughout the entire, is that Toledo never really pulled ahead, and NIU kept it close. They kept their offense going. They played pretty solid defense against a really great DeQuan Finn in Toledo. But I ultimately think that NIU's coming off that loss with a lot of, not necessarily momentum, but like kind of wanting to get that win back and get that season going for them in the MAC. So I have NIU winning this one 20-16 over Akron. Now, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but now let's really break it down. Ball State, keys to the game. Ryan, give me your first key to the game for Ball State.
Well, I hinted at it earlier. They got to run the ball and exploit that weak run defense for Eastern Michigan. Marquez Cooper, use him often and use him in a lot of ways. Yeah, run him up the middle sometime, but also run him to the outside. Just get the ball in his hands. And also take advantage of your playmakers. You know, we saw some guys really step up against Western. There certainly were some bright spots. Tanner Koziel, him and Brady Hunt, when they're both out there, incredible tight end duo. But with Hunt out, Koziel is still a remarkable player, but the defense is able to hone in on him more because he's the only main tight end out there. He just had 1 catch for 13 yards, and I don't put that really on him at all. I just think that the defense for Western Michigan was really focusing on him. And with that, we saw some other guys step up. We talked about what Cooper did in the receiving game, but also Keon Magwood, 9 catches, 110 yards, and that touchdown, which, Caden, you were there shooting the game. I think you actually had the shot.
Yes, I gotta say.
How would you describe that play?
I gotta say, I was absolutely incredible. You know what was, too, is later on in the game when Keon Magwood got another catch, more kind of down to the 25-yard line of their own, is that he did it again, and he cut outside and then cut back inside. All I knew is I was like, I know he was going left. And then when I saw that he was going left, he's going to cut back in because there was all that open room for him to run. The only thing that I had was when he cut back out, was he going to be able to come back inside, or was Western Michigan going to swallow him up? Western Michigan tried to do that shoestring tackle. It was unsuccessful, obviously. He cut back to the outside on the right, and then he was gone. That elusive speed. When I saw him come down, because I see him straight at the camera, running straight at, I'm like, well, one, please keep this in focus. That was the first thing was going through. And the next thing was, he's going to get a touchdown out of this. And this is going to be one of the best touchdowns for Ball State I've seen in a very, very long time. But it was spectacular.
Yeah, it's one of those plays where you're like, no, yes.
Yes, exactly,
so
right.
It was, whirlwind of emotions
yes.
on that one. But yeah, like a sports center top
the
10
crowd,
play.
the crowd, even at Western Michigan, was appreciating that run, because like that is not an easy play at all. The fact that he's cutting back, and as you said, no, running like 8 yards in the backfield, then cutting left and then cutting back right. It was incredible to see in person.
Yeah, just had to shout out that play. Keon's someone that I think is really going to step up and have a big day again. I think he'll be one of Lane Hatcher's favorite targets in this one, so I'm keeping an eye on him. But another key, you just got to have a better start. First drive, field goal's fine. But let's get a touchdown. Georgia Southern ran all over Ball State. It was 14-0, I think, with 8 minutes left in the first quarter. Western Michigan responded very quickly after Ball State kicked a field goal. So let's get a touchdown on the first drive. Let's get some positive energy. And when you just get ahead early, yes, it takes pressure off of the offense, but it also really takes pressure off of that defense. And I think maybe that's what it could be, is the defense with them falling behind early. They kind of get in a panic mode, get desperate, feel like they got to start, going for, big plays or trying to take the ball away rather than just sticking to their assignment and doing their job. Again, that's something Mike New talked about, players trying to do too much. Yep. So for the defense, just do your job, trust the guy next to you. And for the team overall, take advantage of Eastern Michigan's weak run defense, and you just got to have a better start. You have to have a better start, and then what happens from there happens. But I think that, when it takes to the second half to really get going, a lot of times that's too little too late, and that was the case last week.
Yeah, Dave.
I mean, Ryan summed up one of my keys to the game perfectly, so I'm going to use in a quote from the famous movie The Blind Side. Enough with the trick plays, Bert. Run the dang ball. So they got to run the ball. I mean,
you love the movie quote.
Yeah, we do. But they have to run the ball. I mean, Ryan, you said it perfectly. They got to run the ball. They got to expose this weak run defense from the Eagles. And I mean, you said it perfectly. You said exactly, took words out of my mouth there. Exactly what I wanted to say. And the second one I have to say, they got to put it together. I mentioned it earlier. They have to find a way to complete a game. The offense and defense both have to be on the same page. They both got to be clicking. And if they can do that, they'll have success not only in this game, but going forward as they continue into MAC play.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, run the ball is, I think, the key to the game for Ball State, is get Marquez Cooper involved. He had 15 carries for 82 yards. He had a big day last week, so I'm definitely going to look for him to make an impact this weekend against Eastern Michigan. And then I got to say, I kind of brought him up earlier, was Tanner New. They have to contain him because he's their number one fire starter wide receiver for the Eagles, and they have to contain him. And also, something that Eastern Michigan is too is they have two really solid running backs in Jalen Jackson and Simonson Evans, who have ran for a combined 400 yards this season and 3 touchdowns. And yes, we've played now 5 games in the MAC, or 5 total games in the season. But these guys are averaging almost 5.5 yards per carry. And if they're rotating in and out, which they've been doing all season long, Eastern Michigan is going to have a huge day on the ground with these two.
Yeah, and they also got a running quarterback in that mix as well with Austin Smith. So certainly got to tackle good. Just good complementary football, sticking to your assignment. You can't have missed tackles, can't let Eastern Michigan continue drives that they shouldn't be able to continue. Got to get third down stops. And again, Ball State's been pretty good at it, but time of possession could be key in this one.
Yeah. Dane, is there anything you want to add about Eastern?
Yeah, definitely. And this is going to be a game. I think this is going to be a game of running the football. And Ball State might have that advantage, but let's be honest. This Ball State defensive front, they've had a lot of guys banged up, and I think the Eastern Michigan's really going to try to expose that weakness. That Ball State's going to have to rely on some defensive help and some depth on their defensive line. But it's going to be a fun one to watch. Going to have 2 heavy run teams going into this one, but Ball State I think will have the edge in the run game.
Okay, and you said the edge, so now the point being is the final score prediction. Ryan, who do you have taking this one?
Both teams are going to be desperate and hungry, but I think our Cardinals can get it done. Give me Ball State 27-20. I think it'll be back and forth, but I think Ball State will have a good start to the game, and that's what will give them the confidence to win when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I think it's going to be close. I think it's by 1 score. I think Ball State gets it done. They get a much-deserved win, 24-17, and bold prediction, Marquez Cooper goes over 100 yards and gets 2 scores.
Ooh, I love it.
I love it too. But I do love that you guys said 1 score. I'm going to one-up you and say 1 point. I have Ball State winning this one 24-23 in a nail-biter. Who's to say it might not even end on a game-winning field goal? I think these are 2 teams who really want to win, and it's going to be the battle of the trenches, and you're going to see a really decent running game in Ball State and a really a good passing game as well as running with Eastern Michigan. So this is going to be a back-and-forth game. I'm really excited to see it, but I do have Ball State pulling out the upset in this one. And now, guys, that leads us to a fun topic, getting more in the top 25 is our top 6. And Ryan, you and I were talking a little bit off air about, how does the bye week really matter in the grand scheme of things? So, Ryan, with that, I'll start with you. Has anything changed in your top 6?
No, it hasn't. And, part of that is because nobody in it lost. Part of it is because you had a couple teams like Florida State and Ohio State not playing. I'll run through it quickly in case, you weren't listening last week. But I have a bit of a different type of college football rankings. Number 1, I got the Texas Longhorns. I think they still have the best win in the country, 34-24 on the road against Alabama. I think that, I'm getting a finger pointed at me.
Yeah,
So
Dane doesn't seem to be agreeing with that one.
When you look at what they have done, they've won every other game by at least 3 scores. And last week they dominated a Kansas team 40-14 that a lot of people were hyping up. And look, Kansas, a good program, admirable turnaround over the past few years, but Texas really put them in their place and reminded that Texas is a CFP contender. Kansas, a good team, but not at that level yet. So Texas has been dominant. They have the best win in the country. And then right behind them, they were idle, but I have Florida State. Dominant win against LSU, 45-24. Close call against Boston College, 31-29, which I get. But at the end of the day, they won on the road against Clemson in overtime. And I know Clemson's not maybe who we thought they were, but I still respect Clemson enough where I'm not going to punish Florida State for going into OT with Clemson, especially on the road. And then at number 3, another idle team, Ohio State. Defense looking good. Offense, we don't know if it'll be able to reach the same heights as last year. But they have something that a lot of teams don't have, and that is a win on the road against a top 10 team. And that's what I think we need to do with these rankings. I don't care what you did last year. I don't care if you were beating FCS teams at home. What we have to do is we have to reward tough out-of-conference games. We have to reward quality wins against quality opponents. And to me, a winning, ugly, didn't play your best, gutsy type of win on the road against a top 10 team is worth a whole lot more
than destroying an FCS team
that's what we
by
need to
40,
do. We
right?
need to reward these teams for playing tough competitions, for not taking, the easy, we'll just, pay a group of 5 school to come play. It's like, no, we want to go on the road and play Notre Dame. We want to do a home-and-home against LSU, which is the case for Florida State, or a home-and-home against Bama, to take the case for Texas. So that is why I have those 3 as my top 3, Texas, Florida State, Ohio State, because they have, in my opinion, the 3 best wins in the country, and that's what we need to reward, quality wins against other good teams. This year is a clean slate, and at number 4, I have Penn State. Dominant win against Iowa, 31-0. And an Iowa team that was ranked at the time, putting 31 points on that defense. They have an outstanding defense, one of the best in the country. Some other quality wins, a 38-15 win against West Virginia that could be a sleeper team in the Big 12, a 30-13 win against Illinois, where they had 4 interceptions as a defensive squad in that game. And they struggled versus Northwestern. It was 10-10 at the half. I thought about flipping 4 and 5, which we'll get to 5 in a second, but Penn State pulled away and won 41-13. So I kept Penn State at 4, and now at number 5, the defending champs, the Georgia Bulldogs. Look, they could very well be the best team in the country, but they have played a very weak schedule. Gotten off to slow starts in all their games too. 7-0 versus UT Martin in the middle of the second quarter. Tied after a quarter with our Ball State Cardinals. They were down 14-3 versus South Carolina at half, and that was a home game. And they were 7-7 in the second quarter, early second quarter against UAB. In the 2 conference games that they've played against middle-tier SEC teams, I think it's fair to say, they've struggled. They barely squeaked by Auburn. That game was tied with 3 minutes left until Brock Bowers decided to take over. And I just think that, they won last year. They haven't lost since that SEC championship game a couple years ago against Alabama. But at the end of the day, I think what these rankings should be are based on this year, not based on hypotheticals like, I think this team would beat this team, so I'm going to keep them there until they lose. Like, no, you got to go out there and earn it by playing quality opponents. And truthfully, even if you take the quality opponents out of it, Georgia just hasn't looked all that dominant against some lower-tier teams. And I think at the end of the day, while Georgia's, playing weaker competition and struggling, and Ohio State's playing on the road against Notre Dame, and, Texas is winning in Tuscaloosa, I'm not just going to hold the number 1 spot for you. Like, no, you have to earn it. And guess what? Georgia will have their chance. They'll play Florida and Tennessee, and if they get to the SEC championship game, they'll have a quality opponent there. They'll have a chance to make their case. But for now, they just haven't played anyone that gives them a chance to prove that they're the best team in the country. And even against the teams that they've played, they haven't impressed me enough to keep them in the top 4 right now. But it is a long season, and they've got a big game against Kentucky coming up on Saturday that we'll talk about in a little bit. And at number 6, Michigan. Similar to Georgia, this could very well be a top 2 team in the country. Just haven't played anyone that gives them a chance to prove it yet. Dominant win last week versus Nebraska. I thought about flipping them in Georgia because of how dominant Michigan was, but I still have enough respect for the SEC in playing on the road in an SEC environment where even though Georgia was very close with Auburn, I kept them at 5 and didn't swap them with Michigan. But if Michigan puts on another dominant performance, they may be moving up pretty soon. And again, Michigan's a team. They've still got Penn State on the schedule. They still got Ohio State on the schedule, obviously. So these teams are going to have a lot of opportunity to prove themselves, but right now I have Texas, Florida State, Ohio State, Penn State, Georgia, and Michigan rounding out my top 6.
I personally like all your reasons for it, although some maybe I disagree with, but that's what this is all about. But I will say we have Dane Massey over here, who is kind of enraged right now and doesn't really agree with it. Looks like any of the rankings. So Dane, please enlighten us. Give us your top 6.
Actually, I'm gonna throw it back to you, Caden, because I'm so enraged by your picks right now. I don't even have the words to explain mine. So I'll throw it back to you, Caden.
All right. Well, I guess if we're throwing it back, my top 6 also stay the same because the bye week doesn't play in a part to me. I'm gonna go 1-6. Last week I went 6-1, but it is the same. I got number 1 as the Georgia Bulldogs. Yes, I know they have struggled. And yes, they did go into Auburn, and they really didn't have their best football. And I'm still waiting to see that. And we're gonna see how good this Georgia team is at home against Kentucky. And these games usually are pretty low scoring, especially with the Kentucky Wildcats.
Last year it was 16
to 6. Yeah, it was a very low scoring game. And Georgia did really kind of struggle against Auburn, but again, the whole thing with it's a new year. They still have not lost a game in a very long time, and they still do prove why they are a top 5 team and why I still think that they are the number 1 team in the nation. At number 2, I have the Michigan Wolverines. You mentioned it, Ryan. That was a very impressive win against Nebraska, and look, Nebraska we know is not a powerhouse in the Big Ten, and probably one of the bottom tier teams, of course, in the Big Ten. But with Michigan going into Lincoln, and Lincoln is a very difficult place to play. That place is absolutely insane. We saw a couple weeks ago what the entire volleyball team got a game in that stadium and sold out instantly. So it's incredible what's going on there in Lincoln. But Michigan with just a dominant win. They were coming in that 35-0 into the fourth quarter, won this game 45-7 very easily. But yeah, Michigan's defense was again superb. I have them at number 2. At number 3, I have Florida State. And it's, to me, that win against that Clemson that I just keep seeing. And I know it was recent, but that's a huge win. I know Clemson, as we mentioned, not as big as they were a couple of years ago, but that's still going into Death Valley and getting a big win against a division in a conference rival, and none other than the Clemson Tigers. And then, of course, the close game against Boston College. You mentioned the MAC team who beat who was it again? NIU, who beat Boston College earlier this year. But other than that, 66-13, 45-24 against that LSU, and then this is a good Florida State team. And I know this is a new year. I do want to bring this up because I keep seeing it. We know Oklahoma, and we'll talk about Oklahoma in a little bit here, but Oklahoma is a good team. And Florida State, I know this was last year, but Florida State did beat Oklahoma last year in one of the big bowl games. So kind of looking at that too, and looking at the fact that Florida State has stayed consistent and kept a lot of those starters, and that they've only improved. So that's why I have Florida State at my number 3. And number 4, we have the Texas Longhorns. I think Texas has proved a lot, and they've continued to. And I'm very excited to see how they're going to play in this one against Oklahoma. Again, I'm just so excited about that game. But that win against Alabama on the road kind of handled business against Wyoming, and then they put a beat down on. They didn't score 6 touchdowns. Sam Allegro, what I said, what was my prediction. But they did put up a respectable 40 and really held that Kansas offense in check, winning that one 40-14. So I have Texas at number 4. At number 5, I have Oregon. Another dominant win. Same score as they beat Colorado, 42-6, this time on the road. And Stanford is 1-4 this year. And no, they're not a great team in the Pac-12, but they are still a Power 5 team. That is still a road game, and Oregon dominated that game just like they've been doing all season long. And then, of course, I have the Ohio State Buckeyes at number 6. Ohio State, to me, that win against Notre Dame was as you mentioned, going into the Power 5, going into Notre Dame, South Bend, getting that win in the very end of regulation. To me, Kyle McCord showed me a lot in that last drive, but he also showed me signs of fatigue and pressure in that situation. And again, we talked about it last week, how close that ball was to being picked off, and Notre Dame getting the win over Ohio State. Ohio State, to me, I know this sounds crazy, and they're playing Maryland. Maryland's 5-0 right now. And Talia has looked pretty good. He's, I think, 13 touchdowns and just 3 interceptions, so he's been very impressive. So I'm going to see it's going to be interesting to see how Ohio State's going to play against what I believe a pretty good Maryland team. So, yeah, that wraps up my top 6. Again, number 1, Georgia, number 2, Michigan, 3, Florida State, 4, Texas, 5, Oregon, 6, Ohio State. All right, now, Dane, have you calmed down and are ready to give me and Ryan your top 6?
I'm gonna go before I even go into my top 6. The fact that you guys have Florida State even in there is that you guys are out of your minds.
All right,
let's hear
yours
then.
You're
out of your minds.
Let's hear yours.
First of all, I'm gonna go into analysis here. LSU, the first team they play, the number 5 team in the country. LSU is not good. They are not good this year. You can't convince me they're good this year. They're about to fall out of the top 25 this year. So that just knocks off that. And they barely beat Clemson, who they went to overtime with, by the way. And to get a win over Clemson, you guys mentioned it yourselves. Clemson's not that good this year. So
on the road at Death Valley, though.
That doesn't matter. They went to overtime. That's not that.
But Clemson's still a good team in the Big 12. Or in the ACC, right.
They were, but I think that I respect them enough to not hold that against Florida State.
Right.
And I think that if you add up those 2 wins and just the teams I have in my top 6 are they just have so much better resumes than Florida State right now. Number 1 is Michigan. They look like the best team I've seen in a long, long time. It's probably the best Michigan team I have seen in a very, very long time. They've only let up 7 points against their opponents. They've only let up 7 points.
Yeah, their defense
that is very impressive. No other team, I think, has done that. No other defense has done that. And with the way that Michigan has dominated pretty much everybody that has come across them, I guarantee you, if you put any of these teams against Michigan right now, Michigan would win probably by 20 points.
Whoa.
I guarantee you.
That is an extreme hot take.
And especially against their biggest rival, Ohio State. They'd probably look like the Michigan team of last year. They'd probably look better than that. So I think Michigan for sure is the number 1 team.
Yeah, I think Michigan is a world better than Ohio State right now.
And after that, number 2 is Texas. I think Texas has looked incredible. I mean, you put the Alabama win, and you get the recent Kansas win. I mean, Kansas not super power, not a statement win, but they are a top 25 team nonetheless.
They looked like a
top 4 team against Alabama. I agree.
Yes, they did. But Texas at number 2, I think Texas is better than Georgia. I really do in terms of how overall look. Georgia at number 3. I have Georgia number 3. I think Georgia is slightly worse than Texas in terms of just overall play, that offense. I mean, they're coming off a win where they barely beat Auburn in Jordan Hale. So it's interesting to see that Georgia is not looked as good as we think that they usually are supposed to look. They don't look like a number 1 team at all. And I think Texas is for sure better than Georgia.
Yeah.
So going to have to put Georgia at 3. But number 4, I have Oregon. Oregon's also a team that has looked good all season long. I mean, they beat a Colorado team that had so much hype around them, and they beat them by a lot. And I get it was at home, but Colorado's not a team that they're a gritty team. You know they're going to stay in football.
They're not
games,
a team
and they
to take
beat them,
lightly.
and they beat them out of the water, and it wasn't even close. And Bo Nix he's my guy. I love Bo Nix. And if you can tell me that Bo Nix is not a top quarterback in college football right now, you'd be out of your mind. I think that Bo Nix is one of those. It should be up there in conversation.
I would agree with you. I think he should be in the Heisman.
And I think that with the resume that Oregon has beaten their opponents so bad. I think they basically are the Michigan. They're basically Michigan in the Pac-12 right now. I think that Oregon, they have not played a top 25 team yet, but they will eventually play USC. And I think I think Oregon beats USC by a lot.
Okay.
According to you, you think Michigan's going to beat Oregon by 20 points.
Because Michigan is so much better than Oregon, it's unbelievable. I think it'll be a good game. It will be an offensive game, but I think that Michigan will completely blow Oregon out of the water.
Do you think they're going to play in the CFP?
Who, Oregon?
Yeah.
I think they 100%. Michigan will be the number 1 team in the country going into the CFP, and I think Oregon is a Pac-12 champion. Will make the CFP.
Okay.
I think that is possible.
I have to know for your 6 team, real quick. Who do you have? Real quick.
My 6 team, I have Penn State.
Okay. The reason why I want to bring this up.
6. I have Ohio State at 5, and strictly because of that win against Notre Dame. They have a win over a top 10 team in Notre Dame, and it wasn't really the best way that they could have beaten Notre Dame because they were on life support for most of that game. I mean, in that fourth quarter, but they got a win against Notre Dame nonetheless. That's 6 I have Penn State. I mean, not as high strictly because Iowa, Caden McNamara went down with an injury. I mean, he was out, I think, for most of the game, if not. When you beat, it's not really surprising to beat Iowa by 30 points. That's not really surprising.
At Kinnick, though? At Kinnick on the road in that environment.
It was in Penn State, though. It was the whiteout.
Oh, well,
yes, it was.
So
Iowa
that's
was
not
still
surprising.
You're right.
Iowa
was ranked.
They have one of the better
right. That was the
defenses.
whiteout. That's
for Penn State to beat Iowa that way. It really is. It's not super crazy, but it is very surprising considering. And I think that this is one of the best Penn State teams that I've seen in a long time since Saquon Barkley was around. I mean, that tells a lot about this Penn State team with Drew Loar, who looks like $1 million. Drew Loar is a really good guy, and they're going to give Ohio. I mean, they've talked about being at the top of the Big Ten. They could possibly be at the top of the Big Ten this year. So to round out my 6, I got number one. I got Michigan, Texas at 2, Georgia at 3, Oregon at 4, Ohio State at 5, and Penn State at 6.
The reason why I wanted to stop you very quickly was because when you mentioned Oregon is about to go into a huge game. And I believe they have a bye this week, if I'm not mistaken. But their game next week, and then their game after that, they're going into Washington. And I know we don't have Washington in our top 6, but they're pretty dang close to the top 10, I'm sure.
I have Washington at 7.
Exactly. Yeah, I have them at 8 right now. I think Washington's as good as any team in the
those
college football right now.
Pac-12 games when those powerhouses play.
Listen to these next games for Oregon. At Washington, against Washington State, who is a much improved team this year. Mm-hmm. At Utah, they have Cal they should win. And then USC against Oregon. That might be the toughest schedule I have seen in a long time in any of college football schedules.
Well, we'll find out a lot about who Oregon is as a team in terms of a CFP contender very quickly.
All I know is we're going to have a lot of fun on this show going down.
It's going to be fun. I think that Washington Oregon game is going to be fun. I mean, you got Michael Penix, who I think is a Heisman Trophy contender.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah, he's a Heisman Trophy contender up there with Caleb Williams. And it's going to be a fun game, especially going to Washington. And Oregon and Washington, they don't like each other. I think it's pretty fair that they do not like each other in terms of football.
Yeah, it'll be a big.
It's going to be a fun game. I think it's going to be an explosive game, but I don't know. There's something about Oregon that just the way they dominated against Colorado that just screams to me like, yeah, this team is a CFP contender. They could win the Pac-12. And do I think they beat USC? 100%. I think they beat USC. I think Oregon just exposes that USC defense to a hole. That USC defense is just not good. It has not looked good. It didn't look good against Colorado. And Colorado's offense is really good. I'm not going to lie. They're very, very good with Shore Sanders. But I think that USC's defense, just history-wise, it just hasn't been good. It has not been up there in terms of the top defenses in college football. And I think Oregon, if they play their cards right, could very well run the table and get the Pac-12 crown.
Yeah, I will say we got a lot of exciting games coming up in the next weeks, but we also got some really thrilling games on Saturday. So, guys, let's go over them. The first one, I think this is going to be a classic. Oklahoma at Texas, also known as the Red River Showdown. Ryan.
Only 2 undefeated squads left in the Big 12 right here. And when you think this game, you think offense, you think back and forth, shootouts. But I think this year could be a little bit different because defensively these teams have both been better this year than you may realize. Oklahoma has the best defense in the Big 12 right now. They've allowed just 54 points all year for a rate of 10.8 points per game. Texas just behind them, allowing 12.8 points per game. And that's really impressive, especially for Texas when you consider some of the opponents that they've played. You've got 2 really good QBs in Dylan Gabriel and Quinn Ewers who are taking care of the football and doing a lot of good things. This is going to be, I think, an NFL-style game where you're not going to have like a 55-49 type score. I think it's going to be a pretty well-played game. I think it's going to be back and forth. I think you're going to see some big defensive plays, some big offensive plays, and who knows, maybe a big special teams play in there as well. This will be a big win for whoever wins it because then they'll be 6-0 with a really quality win, a quality conference win as well under their belts. You heard me talk up Texas earlier, so I'm picking them. They're my number 1 team right now, and I think they'll stay there as they're going to beat Oklahoma 27-20.
Okay.
Ooh. It's funny because I picked Oklahoma to win on the My 2 Cent show on Wednesday. So I'm going to contradict that. I'm going to go Texas.
I've never seen that before.
It is a win-win. I mean, it's a win-win.
Predict on a different
It's
show.
a win-win. I realized this as soon as like right now. I just realized that I picked Oklahoma to win My 2 Cent show.
This 1 second, I decided
hold on. I'm going to get to my point, okay? I think Texas, because I didn't realize that Texas blew Oklahoma out of the water last year, 49-0. But I think there's a lot more at stake with this game. I mean, Texas is number 3. Oklahoma's at 12 right now. Oklahoma's starting to creep into CFP contention for sure. But Texas, I think, can get a statement win because Oklahoma has won 6 of the last 8 matchups. And the last time Texas won while they were ranked was 2018. That seems like a lifetime ago. You could say it wasn't that long ago, but from now and then, it seems like a lifetime ago. But I think Texas gets it done. I think they still look like one of the best teams in the country. I think Texas gets it done. And I'm going to contradict my point as I said in my 2 cents. It's a win-win for me, so I'm going with Texas.
There you have it. Well, I got to say that's the first time I've heard someone change their pick
Definitely
in between.
interesting.
But I actually do have Oklahoma winning this one. And Ryan, you and I talked a little bit last week about Texas and is there a game this year this is the game they're going to lose. This is the game that'll kind of change their season and how it'll play out. I think it could be this game and the fact that these are 2 great teams. But to me, the reason why Oklahoma is at 12 is, yes, they won 73-0 against Arkansas State. Yes, they won 66-17 at Tulsa, which really is pretty impressive putting up that many points on the road anywhere. But a close game against Cincinnati and then struggled a little bit against SMU. So with what I'm saying, you might think, oh, why do you have Oklahoma winning? Because I just feel like Oklahoma has the edge in this one. I think their offense is just a tiny bit better than Texas's offense, and I have this one being in a classic Red River showdown with Oklahoma pulling out the win 44-38 in overtime in a fantastic game. All right, now let's get down to the other Texas team, Texas A&M. They are hosting Alabama. Dane, let's start. Ryan, let's start with you.
This one has been a really good game each of the past 2 seasons. In 2021, it was Texas A&M winning 41-38 with the walk-off field goal. In 2022, Bama won a much different type of game, winning 20-14 with the goal line stand defensively as time expired. Jalen Milroe did play in that game last year because Bryce Young was hurt. We know Bama's not what they were last year, that the quarterback situation, Milroe's an athlete. He is, improved as the season's gone on, but as a passer, is he developed as a Bryce Young or a Tua Tagovailoa, when they were at Alabama? I don't know. But I think Alabama's going to be different this year because they're going to win games based on their defense. I think this is going to be similar to that Ole Miss game for Alabama where the offense isn't pretty. They might have some drives that stall in the red zone, leave some points on the board, but the defense picks up the slack. So give me the Tide winning 23-13.
Okay.
I just think that Texas A&M always has that one game, and we've seen it every year. They have that one game where they somehow pull it out. Somehow. I mean, we saw it against Texas A&M. It's either LSU or Alabama. It's one of the 2, and I'm going with this one. Texas A&M wins it, and I think they probably win by a touchdown or a field goal. It's going to be really, really close, I think, but I just don't trust this Alabama team. And Texas A&M, again, A&M always has that one game. This is that one game for the Aggies to get it done.
I don't love Alabama's offense, but I think their defense is still one of the top in the country, and that's why I have Alabama. 13 points is what I have, but I have Alabama winning this one 30-13. I think Alabama just dominates the line of scrimmage. I honestly think they hold the Aggies to 6 points through 3 quarters, and then they get a garbage touchdown toward the end. But I have Alabama winning this one easily. In Aggie land. The next one, guys, we've been hyping this one up for a little bit too because we saw Ball State's seen both of those teams, and here we are in week 7 of the season now, and both teams are undefeated. 5-0 Kentucky, 5-0 Georgia at Athens. Ryan, let's start with you.
Yeah, you mentioned it. It's a battle of SEC unbeatens, and I'll be honest, I didn't think much of Kentucky until they beat up on Florida this past weekend. They just didn't impress me in the first 4 weeks, but after seeing how they dominated a good Florida team that was coming off of a win against Tennessee not too long ago, my opinion of Kentucky has definitely changed, and I've talked about it. Georgia looks much more beatable this year than in years past, and it's been slow starts for Georgia in their games, especially offensively. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a game where it's 3-3 with 5 minutes left to go in the first half. I don't think it'll be the flashiest game, but I think it'll be a good one. And also got to shout out Kentucky running back Ray Davis, the transfer from Vanderbilt. He's been spectacular. He had a career day last week. I do think Georgia will squeak by, but with the way that they're playing, yeah, maybe they'll squeak by Kentucky, but I don't know how they'll fare against some of the tougher SEC teams. And no disrespect to Kentucky, because they're 5-0, and Kroger Field's going to be, or it's in Georgia, but Kroger Field's a tough place to play. But they're going to Athens; they don't get that home field advantage. No disrespect to Kentucky, I think Georgia takes it 24-19, but I'm not convinced that this is a Georgia team that could win the SEC this year. But maybe with a strong performance on Saturday, they can change my mind.
There's one thing that I gotta say, and Georgia's playing at home. You don't beat Georgia at home. Give me Georgia by a lot.
Like 20, 30?
I'd say, 20 points, I'd say.
Okay. I'm very close to you in the fact that I've loved what Kentucky's done this season. Yes, they have shown signs of discourage, and they haven't played their best games against some inferior opponents. But what they did against Florida, I had Florida winning that game, and Kentucky silenced me and silenced really whoever had the Gators winning that. But I love what Kentucky's been doing, as you mentioned. Jay Davis has been fantastic for the Wildcats, but I think Georgia's defense and being at home does make a huge difference in an SEC game. I have Georgia winning this one 19-13 over Kentucky. I think they put up a great fight, but ultimately I think the Bulldogs pull it out in the end. All right, guys, our last game of the week, the Louisville Cardinals taking on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Notre Dame's been coming off two very close competitive games. Not any different here, right, Ryan?
Yeah, it's really not. I mean, Notre Dame, it was a hard-fought win at Duke, and it had a similar vibe to that Ohio State game where both teams didn't have their best. It was just going to be who could make that late play at the end, put together that drive. And Notre Dame was on the other side of it, seeing Ohio State convert the big 3rd and 19 and then scoring in the final seconds. And that stung, but then they were going on the road playing a Duke team that was ranked, that's getting a lot of hype this year, and for good reason. And they went in there and they didn't play their best. They didn't score a lot of points, but at the end of the day, they got it done in the late stages and produced a good 2-minute drive to go and win the game. And Sam Hartman's getting a lot of love, the Notre Dame quarterback, and he deserves it. But this Notre Dame defense has also stepped up this year. They have the 11th best rate in the country when it comes to yards per game allowed. And with Louisville, yeah, they're 5-0, but let's dissect this 5-0. And I hate to do this because winning is hard. Winning should never be taken for granted. I don't care who you play. But Louisville's 5-0 is they beat a Georgia Tech team that lost to Bowling Green, FCS Murray State, Indiana, who would probably lose to a couple MAC schools, almost did lose to Akron. Boston College, who did lose to a MAC school in NIU. And then they have NC State, which is a good win against a respectable ACC foe. And I'm not diminishing Louisville starting 5-0, because to go almost half of your regular season without losing, that's hard. That takes consistency. That takes grit. And I'm not trying to take away from the fact that Louisville is 5-0, because there are not a lot of undefeated teams left. And to be one of them at this point, it's hard. And it's a week-to-week league. It's a grind, and winning is hard. But I think the 5-0 record could be a little bit misleading if you don't actually dissect their schedule and see who they've played. So I think Notre Dame, I feel like people want this to be a good game because Louisville's ranked now. Louisville gets the game at home. It's in prime time. But at the end of the day, I just don't think Louisville is quite as talented as Notre Dame. Give me Notre Dame 38-20.
Okay.
Now listen, guys. You guys know I love a good underdog story. And Louisville right now is atop of the ACC right now. I don't know if you guys know this. You can fact check me on this. But Louisville is sitting atop of the ACC right now. They look as good as they're going to get. This is the first time that since 2013 that they are sitting atop. They're undefeated and sitting atop of the ACC. And this is another challenge for Notre Dame. They have to go on the road to Louisville to play the Cardinals. And they struggled. Duke had them. The Blue Devils had Notre Dame. They had them by the tips of their fingers, and they let them slip away.
Yeah.
And this is another challenge for Notre Dame. But let's be honest. Louisville is not Duke. Louisville fans will show up. They will be loud. They are going to give Notre Dame some problems.
I will say,
Duke
had two sellouts though, and that crowd. Yes, Louisville is more passionate ultimately, but Duke had full crowds at both of their games against Notre Dame and who was the game earlier they played? It was a couple weeks ago. It was like a Clemson. It was Clemson. I know Clemson's not the same team, but Duke is still a very big ACC team in the sense
I still think that Louisville, in terms of their energy, and their crowd's going to bring it.
Their
crowd is going to bring it. And we saw that if Notre Dame can't beat Duke, they beat Duke, but they barely beat Duke. Duke had them Duke had them, but they let them slip away. What do you think this undefeated Louisville team's going to do? And I think Louisville gets it done. I think Louisville gets an upset over Notre Dame.
Whoa.
And the woes are just going to continue for Fighting Irish fans, and Louisville is going to be drinking on sweet, sweet victory against Notre Dame.
I love the bold prediction. I do agree in the fact that Louisville is very hostile, and they do have a very great fan base. And honestly, I can picture Louisville right now running out of the tunnel and it being all black and them wearing their black uniforms and like it just being such a cool, surreal. We always love the whiteouts of Penn State, the blackouts at tons and tons of big stadiums. But yeah, I agree the fact that Louisville is a very great team. But the one game that I looked at, and I was debating back and forth about this one a lot, is what makes Notre Dame better than Louisville. And obviously you could talk about the quarterback play of Sam Hartman, but to me it's one game that Louisville and Notre Dame have both played, and that was against NC State. NC State, or Louisville, barely snuck past an NC State team who's, yes, they're 3-2 now after Louisville and Notre Dame, but we know they're not one of the best teams in the ACC. We know that they're not, Florida State or like a team like that. And so for Louisville to go in there, and yeah, it was even a night game, but NC State, or Louisville really kind of struggled in that game. If you look at Jack Plummer, the quarterback for Louisville, 21 for 35, did throw 286, but 2 interceptions against a really not a solid defense in NC State. I kind of am leaning toward Notre Dame because then you look at what Notre Dame did against NC State, same time on the road. Sam Hartman, 15 for 24, also threw 286 yards. There's a little fact if you didn't know it. But he had 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He was superb in an easy Notre Dame victory, which is why I think the Fighting Irish, although they've gone through 3 very difficult games, I do think they pull this out. They have the experience to win at Louisville. Give me the Fighting Irish 31-23.
I could definitely see Notre Dame pulling it out, but I just love a good underdog story, and that's why I'm picking
Who doesn't?
Louisville.
Who doesn't? And honestly, right now, I still feel like the Texas Longhorns could be with the way that they've been wheeling off wins left and right. But yeah, there's so much to break down. Ryan, Dane, do you have anything to add about this week? Mac, Ball State, whatever?
I'm just excited to take it all in, obviously hoping that our Cardinals can get back in the win column. Really a big game for them because, again, disappointing loss to Western Michigan to open the MAC season, but there's still so much in front of this team. You get that first conference win, you're 1-0, or you're 1-1 in conference play heading into Toledo week, and then that game would really be a big game, but you can't look ahead to that game. Ball State just has to focus on taking it 1 week at a time, focusing on the things that they have been doing well and building on them. And we talked about the keys to the game earlier, so I won't be redundant, but big one for the Cards that they got to win if they want any chance at competing for a MAC title and also for bowl eligibility because, you got to go 6-6 to be bowl eligible. And if they lose, they drop to 1-5, making it a really tough climb to get back to that 500 mark. So
yeah,
big game for the Cards. I'll be watching. Hope that they can get it done.
They would have to turn it around quickly if they were to fall to Eastern Michigan. Dane?
I just love the fact I contradicted my point about the Oklahoma-Texas game. I think that's kind of funny, but it's gonna be good. It's gonna be a good week of college football. I think it's gonna be fun. I mean, there's a lot of big games on this week, especially with the 4 games that we talked about. It's gonna be a big week of college football, and I'm just excited to get watching.
Yeah, only one thing to do, and that's just count down the hours until the weekend begins for a jammed-packed weekend of college football. For Ryan Stojetz, I'm Caden Vincent. Dane, we really like to appreciate you coming on the air and talking with us. And we will be back next Thursday for for Behind the Lines, episode number 3, but week 7 of the college football season, guys. Have a great week, and go Cards.
This has been a production of SportsLink Digital Radio.